I was teaching the ledger to 12 children when the sky over Meridian split white, and I understood, before anyone spoke, that the day my grandmother had drilled into me since I could hold a slate had finally come. We call it the hush. 27,000 years ago, a company of deserters who named themselves the Kessa Free, soldiers who had broken off from a beaten fleet somewhere out past the dark, with nothing left to lose and a great deal left to take, dropped a weapon into low orbit they called the choir. It sang for 6 hours. When it stopped singing, every circuit on this planet was ash. Every grid, every satellite, every light behind every window, gone between one evening and the next. The Kessa took what they wanted from the wreck, the reactors that still had a pulse in them, the water plants, the metal, and they left the rest of us in the dark, because a species with no power and no memory does not rebuild. It grieves, and then it goes quiet, and then it is gone. They were wrong about all three. I should say plainly what the Free Company was. They were not an empire, not a crusade, nothing with a banner worth remembering. They were deserters who had walked away from a losing war with whatever they could carry, and who had learned that an unarmed, ungoverned world was the easiest kind of plunder there was. Earth was never a conquest to them. It was a job, finished in an evening, filed away like a warehouse already emptied. They spent what they took from us on louder wars elsewhere, and by every account that survives, they spent all of it. 27,000 years is a long time to live large on someone else's ruin, and eventually, even ruin runs out. My grandmother was 6 years old the night the sky went white the first time. She used to say the worst thing about the hush was not the dark. It was how ordinary the next morning looked. The sun still came up, the birds still complained, and nobody understood yet that the whole shape of their lives had ended overnight. She said the guilds were born within the year, not because anyone gave a speech about it, but because a blacksmith and a school teacher and a woman who used to run a hospital's supply chain sat down together and worked out, on paper, by candlelight, that if their children's children's children were going to face this again, they could not be caught guessing a second time. So they didn't guess. They built. Not fast, that was never the promise, but they built with the patience of people who had already learned that the Kessa, or someone like them, might come back one day to check on the corpse. Every apprenticeship in Meridian teaches 2 curricula at once, and only the guild masters know which parts belong to which. The bell founders teach casting, and also teach the tolerances for something that isn't a bell. The water rights teach irrigation, and also teach pressure systems that have no business in a well. For 27,000 years, we let this city look exactly as poor and patched and analog as the day the choir went silent. Because the day the Kessa returned, we needed them to see precisely what they expected to see. There is a discipline to that kind of patience outsiders rarely understand. It would have been easier, generations ago, to let the city shine, to raise towers of light and dare whoever came back to try us. Easier, and fatal, because a bright city invites study, and study finds truth. Oren's own teacher used to say, "The safest fortress in the galaxy is the one that looks like a ruin from orbit and only reveals itself at the range of a handshake." So the masons kept the old stone facades long after better materials existed, and the lamplighters walked their rounds with oil lamps decades after the guild had solved cleaner light, because a lit window is a data point we were not willing to hand the Kessa before we chose to. They came at dawn, the way scavengers always do, low and quiet, 3 landers dropping out of a sky with no working satellite by any record they carried. Their commander was called von Kessa, and I watched him from the registrar's tower with the rest of the ward, the way you'd watch weather. He walked into Meridian's outer market with his rifle slung, not raised, the posture of a man inspecting an estate he already owned. His people photographed our carts, our lanterns, our hand-pumped wells, and I heard one of them laugh, an ugly, relieved sound, the laugh of a company that had spent everything they once stripped from us, and had finally come back to collect the rest before it rotted further. Von Kessa asked for our elders. We gave him Registrar Orenthale, an old man with a limp and a voice like gravel, who had spent 60 years teaching young smiths the tolerances only guildmasters understood. Oren let him talk, let him list, almost kindly, everything Meridian lacked. Let him explain, the way you'd explain to a slow child, that resistance would be brief, and that the Free Company had done this to 100 worlds, and knew exactly how it went. I watched all of this from the tower, with my heart doing something I had never rehearsed for, no matter how many drills I had run as a child. Every year since I could hold a slate, the guild staged a return drill. An ordinary morning when the wardens sounded an unscheduled alarm, and every child in Meridian practiced walking calmly to an assigned cellar, because a frightened crowd is the one thing that gives a false city away. I had run that drill perhaps 30 times, and never once believed I would someday run it for real. Watching Von Kessa's boots move across our market stones, I understood that every one of those ordinary mornings had been building toward this single hour. It was the bell that changed his face first. Somewhere past noon, the founders rang the noon bell the way they had every day of my life, and Von Kessa's translator went very still, listening to something underneath the tone that no bell has any business carrying, a pulse any competent signals officer would recognize as a system checking in with 100 others just like it. I watched the realization move through his ranks, the way cold moves through water, one man at a time, each running the same private arithmetic. A city with no power grid does not have synchronized instruments. A dying species does not maintain 27,000 years of coordinated tolerance work disguised as folkcraft. What they stood inside of was not a ruin recovering. It was a fortress that had spent 300 generations learning to look like one. Oren let the silence sit before he told him the rest, plainly, without triumph, because triumph was never the point. He told him about the guilds within the guilds, about the water rights pressure systems, which were never for wells, about the reactors under the old floodplain that had been quietly humming, shielded and patient, since before either of our grandparents were born, about a watch that had stood every single night for 27,000 years, on the chance that a landing exactly like this one would someday happen, and about the fact that Von Kessa's 3 landers had been tracked, catalogued, and answered before they ever cleared the upper atmosphere. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The ground itself answered for him. Plates that had looked like ordinary market paving folding back along seams no eye had ever found. Defense towers rising out of buildings we had walked past our whole lives believing them nothing but old granaries. I will not pretend the cost was small. 2 of the Kessa landers ran, and we let them, because letting a few carry the truth home as a warning was always part of the plan. Oren's teachers had drawn up 60 generations earlier. The 3rd did not run in time, and Meridian lost the North Granary Quarter and 11 people I had known my whole life putting out the fire it left behind, among them my apprentice Doran, who had rung that noon bell every day for 3 years, and never once asked me what it was really for. I stood in the ash of the North Quarter that evening with Oren beside me, and asked him if it had been worth 27,000 years of pretending to be nothing. He looked at the wreck a long time before he answered. He said the Kessa had come looking for a corpse and found a city instead, and that the difference between those 2 things was every apprentice who had ever learned a false lesson on purpose, so it could one day become a true one. He said the cost was real and would stay real, and that we would grieve it honestly rather than dress it up as victory. And he said that somewhere out past the dark, 2 landers were carrying home the only message the Kessa Free Company would ever need, that Earth had not been waiting to be found. Earth had been waiting to be tested, and had passed the only way that ever mattered, quietly, and for longer than anyone thought a species could hold its breath. I have told this story once before, to my own apprentices, on the anniversary of the North Quarter fire. I will tell it again next year, and the year after, for as long as there is a bell to ring at noon, and a tower to watch the sky from, because that is what we do here. We remember, we prepare, and when the day comes, we let it find us ready, and grieve what it costs us honestly, without ever mistaking patience for luck.